I've told my son that I want, when I first heard of Google Glass, for example, I thought, oh great, I could just take one of these and that'll be perfect. And after a while, my son kind of looked at me like I was crazy, because by his mind, this is going to be antiquated.
Right.
Probably is already. So, I would say, and I guess I think more long run than most people, because it's easy to forget your mortality when you think long run, by the way.
How recurring.
What's it going to be like in 2100? And if you think long enough, you'll forget the fact that you'll never see it. But I think long run, you're just going to see a change in what humans want and what humans labor for. Now, in the short term, for the folks who are dislocated, that doesn't really help them, and I understand that. But economic history tells us that we really don't have a very good answer for the dislocated, because we didn't figure it out during the Industrial Revolution. We didn't really figure it out much during the 70s and 80s, and I don't think we're doing a good job of figuring it out right now. So, go ahead.
Way back to one of your questions about the government with algorithms. They're risk averse and they want to keep prices down. Government contractors who I work with are all going algorithm. The goal is to keep prices down. How do you do that? You take away human labor costs. It's going to happen.
Oh no, from a contracting perspective, you're absolutely right. I see it myself. I think in terms of, what I had gone to that question was in terms of, not necessarily from the contracting point of view, but in terms of the regular citizen vis-a-vis government point of view. What will government determine is important in terms of the rate, what will the electorate demand that their elected officials regulate? And I think that will probably change as so much of our society becomes more algorithm driven.
And it will probably be determined by egregious issues that occur. Like someone dies and they'll start making legislation against what the algorithm can and cannot do. The challenge that I'm having, and I'd love to get the opinion of the room, is that the assumption seems to be that if AI happens, if computers become sentient, that they won't have emotion.
I don't hold to that view.
Because that's every movie that I see, it's almost like, not every movie, Ex Machina is starting to play with that now. Other movies are playing with that. Mm-hmm. But it seems like it's more logic. Like the computer becomes sentient and it's now super logical. Why would that happen? Why would computers be purely logical?
A lot of that depends on the premise of how the machine in question becomes aware.
Right.
To look at Ex Machina particularly, that was not an attempt to create an intelligent machine. That was an attempt to create an android woman.
Right.
And of course, once you got technology complex enough, she decided to do her own thing. So, yeah. What I really think is interesting is we talk about. This is why they chose you to moderate this panel, because this all ends up being about economics.
Oh, so that's
it really
because we talk about what are people going to do when robots put millions of people out of work. Well, that depends on how they put them out of work.
And how fast it happens.
Well,
yeah.
I think it's really the how fast may affect how violent reaction gets, mm-hmm. But there's basically a few ways that you can put people out of work. One is, hey, we have the new machines, we don't need you, you're fired, get out. And you have millions of people suddenly unemployed, and there's going to be riots in the streets, and society is going to have a hard time not collapsing on itself. And probably the robots will all be destroyed, and we'll lose all that cheap labor. The other possibility is, hey, we've got these great robots, they do all those petty tasks that are such drudgery for you. We've got so much cheap industrial labor. We only need to employ a handful of people to keep industry going. So our costs have plummeted, so our prices have plummeted. So even though you don't have to work anymore, in fact, very few people will actually be able to find conventional jobs, everything is now so cheap, you can afford to live a good life. In which case the question is, well, what would you do if you didn't have to work for a living?
Well, that's and that's the part where I'm going to respectfully disagree, because what I think will happen is that, again, the things that might be considered unattainable to us will certainly be considered more attainable if a whole bunch of labor is no longer being if there's a whole bunch of human labor that is not needed now, then we will put that human labor to something else. And that has been the history throughout most of the second millennium. And in a lot of cases, what will happen is we will end up creating markets and creating services that we just aren't even thinking about right now. The other thing is, I will actually say, that could actually be one of them, oddly enough.
That's another possibility.
And one of them, and you mentioned three options. I interrupted you before the third, so I'm going to pose my third. Sorry, is you could end up having, and it's actually what we are beginning to see. If society decides that the market is not setting the price of labor at a price that they prefer, and they would like government to artificially jack the price up higher, that makes labor-saving machinery and robotics and these things less expensive by comparison, because we are now artificially jacking up the cost of labor. So we could very well have a situation where you get, okay, we're going to get these new machines to replace people who end up not being hired in the first place because firms decide they were too expensive to hire right at the beginning. So that's somewhere between disaster and nirvana. It's usually what we do with stuff. We put it somewhere between disaster and nirvana, and here we are.
You can see that like at the McDonald's level, where they could easily build machines to take on some of the tasks that humans do. So instead of needing 6 people, they might need 3. And I think that it's problematic for that labor pool. The automated garbage truck, or whatever, the automated machines in the factories. I think that's a difficult area, because what do you find to do with that labor pool? I think it becomes complicated, and I'm not equating all those necessarily.
Sounds like economics again.
It is. The economics play a huge role.
But I think that humans are very adaptive. I mean, we, as a species, we want to survive.
But individually, it can be a lot more complicated.
Individually, yeah. I mean, I grew up in, where I grew up in the 80s, I grew up right outside of Baltimore, and we had like Sparrows Point and a lot of places that shut down, and that had to do with jobs being taken overseas. And so I saw a lot of my friends' fathers who worked in the factories out at work, and it is incredibly hard for a community. And it's like, when that is what you depend on, like generations worked at this plant, and that is all you know, and you didn't have any other education, it's tough. But you will have to learn a new skill, learn something new.
You mentioned adaptation, and that got me to the one other question I wanted to throw in, and I'll let the panel I'll let the audience get as much as I can. We've talked about robotics and how robotics move forward. It can also work in the other direction, where robotics can end up enhancing humanity. I know, for example, my wife would not be sitting here today without the advances, or she's not sitting here, she's over there somewhere. But she wouldn't be over there without the advances in pacemaker technology. One thing that has always fascinated me, because I'm almost certain it's impossible now, is you mentioned about how machines in theory not theory, in fact, can process calculation faster than we can. Is it possible that there could be machinery that accelerates our brain functions to the point where we could actually keep up with them?
That'd be awesome.
Now, would that also mean that we would age 70 years in a minute and a half?
I'm ready to be uploaded.
Well, I mean, they're already doing it with some amputees. Like, we see where somebody loses an arm, and they're able to take the robotic arm and hook it up to the person's nervous system, and they can move it using their brain power. I mean, that to me is absolutely amazing. I mean, it's still, I think it's still
kind of a one-way technology where the brain drives the machine.
Yeah.
What's going to be fascinating is when we learn enough about how our own bodies work to be able to put sensors on the end of that artificial arm and drive feedback back to the brain, so that So we've got Luke Skywalker where he's got a brand new arm,
Yeah.
and he can actually feel things and have the full sensory experience with his artificial arm.
Well, even